Cadillac Mountain rises 1,500 feet above the North Atlantic, a crown of pink granite and stunted pine that catches the first light of the United States from October to March. On this particular morning, the summit is shrouded in a pre-dawn chill that bites through wool, the air a sharp cocktail of salt spray and boreal forest. There are hundreds of us here, a quiet congregation of strangers wrapped in blankets, our breath hitching in the dark as we wait for the sun to break over Frenchman Bay. I came here not as a tourist, but as a pilgrim, though at the time the word felt too heavy for my tired spirit. My faith had become a series of hollow echoes, a map where the landmarks had all been erased by a long season of quiet grief. I was seeking something, not a grand miracle, but a reason to keep walking. And then at 5:10, the curtain began to stir. A molten line of gold bled across the horizon, unmasking the Porcupine Islands one by one as the light spilled across the water like spilled ink on a silk sheet. In that moment, the specific subject of my doubt, the why that had been keeping me awake for months, didn't vanish, but it suddenly looked very small against the scale of a sunrise that had been occurring, indifferent and majestic, for thousands of years before I arrived. It was the first time in a long time I felt the weight of my own existence as a gift, rather than a burden. The journey southward from Maine is a transition through textures. You move from the jagged, quartzite ledges of Cape Elizabeth, where the Portland Head Light has stood watch since 1791, toward the shifting, meditative sands of the outer reaches. By the time I reached the dunes of Cape Cod, the rocky certainty of the north had given way to a liminal landscape. The beach here is a threshold, a place where the land and sea are constantly negotiating their boundaries. I spent a week near Craigville Beach, walking the salt marshes of Nantucket Sound. One afternoon, I sat on a weathered piece of driftwood, watching the tide pull back to reveal a hidden world of tide pools teeming with urchins and sea glass softened by the ocean's patience. There's a specific spiritual practice called beachcombing that isn't about searching for what was lost, but about receiving what the world offers without demand. I found myself bending down to touch the sand, a gesture that felt like a prayer of surrender. I wasn't asking for answers anymore. I was just trying to be present in the borderlands where the known meets the unknown. Further down the coast, on the windswept barrier of Assateague Island, I encountered a different kind of resilience. The wild horses there are survivors of a harsh, salty ecosystem, descendants of colonial livestock, or, if you believe the local lore, survivors of a 17th-century Spanish shipwreck. They are small, stocky creatures, their coats thickened by the ocean wind, surviving on nutrient-poor cordgrass and drinking twice the water of a domestic horse just to process the salt. I watched a lone stallion standing against a gale on the Maryland shore, his mane matted with sand, eyes fixed on the horizon. He didn't fight the wind, he simply leaned into it. He reminded me of a conversation I'd had with an old beachcomber in a diner a few miles back, a woman with skin like creased leather and eyes the color of a winter sea. She told me that smooth seas never made a skilled sailor. It was a cliché, sure, but seeing that horse standing his ground while the storm clouds bruised the sky made the words feel like iron. Faith, I realized, isn't the absence of the storm, it's the stamina to stay on your feet while the wind is trying to take you down. The true test of that realization came in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, a place known as the graveyard of the Atlantic. Over 1,000 ships rest beneath those shifting shoals, claimed by the same currents that now pulled at my feet as I walked the empty shores of Nag's Head. I was there when a nor'easter rolled in, a sudden, violent storm that mirrored the Ash Wednesday storm of 1962, which remains the yardstick of destruction for the locals. The wind topped 70 miles an hour, and 30-foot waves hammered the dunes until the very geography of the island began to shift. It trod on a porch in the dark, listening to the zero-count boom of thunder, feeling the house vibrate with the power of the surge. It was terrifying, but there was a strange clarity in it. Theologian Diane Butler Bass once described a hurricane as a structure where the edges are chaos, but the center is absolute stillness. My inner struggle had been all edges, all chaos and noise, but in the middle of that Carolina storm, I found a pocket of silence. I remembered the story of the disciples on the Sea of Galilee, terrified of the waves while their master slept. I understood then that the peace wasn't in the calming of the storm outside, but in the recognition of the one who was in the boat with me. The storm didn't destroy the beach, it transformed it. When the clouds cleared, the shoreline was in a new place, and so was I. My pilgrimage ended in the Low Country on the beaches of Folly Island just outside of Charleston. Known as the Holy City for its skyline of steeples, Charleston is a place where history and spirit are inseparable from the marshes. Folly Beach has a different energy than the north. It's unpolished, a landscape of moss-covered oaks and kitsch, 50s charm. I spent my final evening walking toward the Morris Island Lighthouse, which stands solitary in the water, abandoned by the receding shoreline. The rhythm of the waves there is a constant, a heartbeat that has outlasted Civil War sieges and countless hurricanes. As the sun set, turning the salt marshes into a tapestry of glowing orange and deep indigo, I felt a profound sense of arrival. Not because I had reached a destination, but because I had finally learned to trust the rhythm. Faith was no longer a grand gesture or a theological argument. It was the quiet act of putting one foot in front of the other on soft sand, knowing that while the walk is hard, it makes you stronger. I looked out at the vastness of the Atlantic and realized that the ocean doesn't pause for anyone's doubt, it just continues, timeless and true. And in that surrender, I found my peace. I was no longer a traveler seeking a home. I was a pilgrim who had found that home is wherever you are willing to stand and be still. If you know someone who is currently navigating their own storm, pass this journey along to them.